All right, let's try something. We're going to go on a historical investigation, but with a major twist. We're putting aside every friendly source, every single religious text. Instead, we're going to ask a really simple question. What did the enemies and the critics of early Christianity have to say about its founder? Let's see what the hostile witnesses tell us. So here's the central question for this entire thing. Just imagine for a second that every Christian document, the Gospels, the letters, all of it, vanished. Poof. Gone. Would the man at the very center of it all, Jesus of Nazareth, even be a blip on the historical radar? We're about to find out, and we're only going to use the testimony of people who had zero reason to do him any favors. Now, before we call our first witness, we have to get this one crucial principle straight. Historians have a term for it: hostile corroboration. Just think about it this way. If your own mom says you're a great basketball player, that's nice. But if your biggest rival, the guy who's been trying to beat you all season, admits you've got a killer jump shot, that means something. When an enemy admits a fact that actually hurts their own argument, historians, well, they sit up and pay very close attention. And look at these dates. This is what's so wild. These aren't writers from hundreds and hundreds of years later trying to piece together some ancient myth. No, they're writing within a generation or two of the actual events. To put it in today's terms, that's like someone writing a history of the 1980s right now. The events were still fresh. People who were there, or at least their kids, were still walking around. So keeping that in mind, let's start our investigation right in the belly of the beast, Rome. So our investigation begins at the very heart of power, Rome itself. And the first clues we find, they're not these long, detailed biographies. They're more like annoyed little notes from Roman officials who are starting to notice this new and, frankly, very troublesome movement that's making waves in their city. So let's call our first witness to the stand, the historian Gaius Suetonius. This was a man who knew what was going on in the Roman inner circle. And let's be clear, this guy was a big deal. We're not talking about some random blogger. As the chief secretary to the Emperor Hadrian, Suetonius had access to the imperial archives, the official records. He was a meticulous historian and, most importantly, a dyed-in-the-wool Roman pagan. His job was to write about Roman emperors, not to help out some new religion from a backwater province. And here it is, our first piece of hard evidence from an enemy source. Suetonius is writing about something that happened way back in 49 CE. He mentions these riots in Rome, and he says they were stirred up by someone named Chrestus. Now, Chrestus was a very common way people back then misspelled Christus, or Christ. So what does this tell us? It tells us that less than 20 years after the crucifixion, this movement's leader was already famous, or maybe infamous enough to be blamed for riots in the capital of the entire world. Okay, the paper trail continues. And our next witness isn't writing a history book years later. He's filing an official report to his boss. His name was Pliny the Younger. Right, so Pliny's a Roman governor. He's got a problem on his hands in his province with this weird new group, and he doesn't know what to do. So around the year 112, he does what any government official would do. He writes to his boss, the Emperor Trajan, and asks for advice. This is real-time problem solving, not ancient history. And in this letter, he gives us this incredible little detail. He says he's investigated these Christians, and he found that their main thing was meeting before sunrise to sing a hymn to Christ as to a god. Now just think about that. This is an outsider, a Roman official, confirming not just that these people exist, but the absolute core of their belief. They were worshiping Christ as if he were a god. Okay, so we've got these whispers, right? A court historian, a provincial governor, they see the smoke. But what about the fire? What happens when we put the greatest, most respected Roman historian of the entire era on the stand? What did he have to say about the man himself? And this brings us to our star witness. Seriously, if this were a court case, this is the testimony everybody in the room would lean in to hear. This is the big one. That star witness is the great Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus. To say Tacitus was a good historian is like saying Shakespeare was a decent writer. I mean, he's the gold standard for this period of Roman history. And this is the crucial part. He despised Christians. He called their faith a deadly superstition. This makes what he's about to say so unbelievably powerful because he has zero motivation to make any of this stuff up. Zero. And boom, there it is. He's writing about the Great Fire of Rome and how the Emperor Nero tried to blame it on the Christians. And in the middle of explaining who these people were, he just casually drops this historical bombshell. He confirms the founder's name, Christus. He confirms his fate, the extreme penalty, that's Roman speak for crucifixion. He confirms the time frame, during the reign of Tiberius, and he even names the specific government official who did it, Pontius Pilate. A hostile witness just laid out the core facts of the crucifixion story. All right, so far we've been listening to the Romans. Now let's pack our bags and head to the epicenter of the story, Judea, to hear from a contemporary Jewish historian. Our final key witness is Flavius Josephus, and he brings a completely different, but still very much non-Christian, perspective to the table. Josephus is a fascinating character. He was a Jewish military commander who fought against Rome, lost, and then ended up becoming a historian for the Romans. He was a mainstream Jew, not a Christian, and his books are basically our best guide to what was happening in first century Judea. Now, what makes this quote so powerful is how boring it is. Josephus is just telling a story about the death of a man named James, who was a leader in Jerusalem. And to make sure his readers know which James he's talking about, he just casually adds, oh yeah, he was the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. He just assumes everyone reading knows exactly who Jesus Christ is. For a historian, this is gold. It's called an incidental reference, and it shows the person was so well known you could use them to identify somebody else. All right, let's take a step back. We've heard from the Roman court chronicler, the worried governor, the master historian, and the Jewish historian. So let's lay all their testimony out on the table and see what kind of picture emerges when we put it all together. And just look at this. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Remember, these guys weren't collaborating. They're writing at different times, in different places, for totally different reasons. Yet, their stories line up. They all independently confirm that a man named Christ existed. They confirm he was from Judea, that he was executed, and that his followers, who, by the way, worshipped him as a god, had spread all the way to Rome. The puzzle pieces just fit. So this is what we can call the historical bedrock. If we threw out every single Christian document and only read what the critics and the outsiders wrote, this is the absolute minimum we would know for a fact. A Jewish teacher named Jesus existed, people called him the Christ, the Roman government executed him in Judea, and his movement exploded, spreading all the way to Rome where people worshipped him. This isn't a statement of faith. It's a conclusion based on the secular and often hostile historical record. So the answer to our first question is a definite yes. And all of this leaves us with one last huge question. The Roman Empire crucified thousands of rebels and would-be messiahs. They were a dime a dozen. Almost all of them were executed and immediately forgotten. So why this one? Why did a crucified teacher from a dusty corner of the empire make such a massive impact that even the great historians of the world's most powerful empire had to write him into their chronicles? Now that's something worth thinking about.